What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel, and I want to touch on a subject that you just don't see no videos on. You can Google information on trying to find this stuff and you just can't find it. So today I'm going to show you how to make a slip joint no bar slot car chassis for a drag car, and some of the things that you need, tools, acid, solder, stuff that I use, and the techniques that I use whenever I build one of these type of cars. And they can be kind of intimidating, especially if you've never soldered before. If you've never soldered metal before, then it might be kind of a challenge. You might need some help or a tip or a trick or something like that. And I'm going to show you what I do. And so let's get started. Okay, so here is the chassis. You know, these chassis come, this is made by Scribner Rails. It's a SR103XD. This is going to be the package that it comes in, a little bag, you know. And the back half is going to come in a plate like this that you have to, you know, get out of there. And kind of like a puzzle when you go to put this thing together, and you might not even know how the heck it goes together, and that's why we're doing this video. So, a couple of things you're going to need. One, chassis. Two, you're going to need some Lucky Bob's acid flux. I know you probably can't see that, it looks terrible. But this is made by a company called Lucky Bob's. It's acid flux. It's $5 a bottle. And if you do not have this, you just go ahead and stop what you're doing, because you're never going to solder one of these chassis without this stuff. I don't care what flux you use. People call me all the time and they want to know how the heck do they solder this. They can't get the solder to stick. Nothing works. They've tried paste flux. They've tried this flux. They tried Dux flux. They just, and it doesn't work. Well, you have to have this Lucky Bob's acid flux LB 1200, and I put it in one of my like model car paint caps, because you will spill this. You will. It's just, I've spilled 10 of these bottles. So it really helps to have something that you can put it in, because you're gonna have a bad habit of, you know, putting acid on the product and then just dropping it right back in there. And if you leave this bottle out, you're gonna whack it with your hand. You're gonna have your iron and you're gonna whack it, whatever, and it's gonna get acid all over the freaking place, all in your house, all in your shop, whatever. I build stuff in my house, so you know, if I spill this crap on the floor, it's gonna make a freaking mess. So anyways, let's move forward. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the assembly of this. I told you about the acid. Next is going to be some solder. There's a bunch of different solders you can use. I like to use 6040 rosin cord electrical solder. I don't really have any of that right now. I have some other solders, and that's what we're going to use. I have a few different solders. Actually, this stuff works really good. This is a rosin cord solder 6040, so you know, this stuff works really good. It's kind of thin. This is on the thinner side. You know, you can get some of that big fat stuff too. You know, you got that. You know, that thing's way thicker than that. So, but this stuff will make a mess, and because it's just kind of a lot. And when you're building one of these chassis, it's all about cleanliness and how clean you can make that solder, and you know, how nice you can really make it. I mean, some of these guys out here are real big sticklers on, you know, how these chassis are built, and if you don't know what you're doing, all that nonsense. But it's a toy car. At the end of the day, it's a toy car. As long as it's together and it's strong, that's all that matters. Square, that's, you know, you're going to have a good working car. So, let's move forward. We got the iron hot. Okay, my iron, you need a good soldering iron. Okay, I have a Atten ST2090D. It's pretty, it's your basic, you know, soldering iron. It's not anything spectacular. It's like a whole Amazon special. And it seems to get the job done. So, we've got our solder. We got our acid over here ready to go. We got all of our pieces right here chopped apart. And I'm gonna get started. So, first thing you're gonna want to do is you're gonna want to take your pieces and kind of fit them together and see how they fit. You know, this is the back half, and your motor bolts to that piece there. Slip your uprights in. You might have to do a little finessing or sanding, you know, to get these pieces together, because they can kind of be a bear sometimes, like this one is doing. You don't want to go in, but it's pretty much like a puzzle. You see it's notched out here. That's for that notch on the bottom of that upright there is going to ride right in there. It's going to go right in that spot. That might be kind of hard to see because I'm doing this on my phone, but that's how that goes in there. And the forward upright goes and hits that, locks in to that motor pod there. So you got that little T at the end, and that's going to lock in to the motor pod. You're supposed to use a pillow block, is what they call it, when you assemble these, and that keeps these uprights perfectly straight and square, so you know that you're good there. But we don't need one of those where we're going. I just make sure everything's nice and tight together. Just take a gander at stuff and make sure it looks, you know, square and flat. Everything's locked in good. I feel like that can go down a little bit farther. I just want to give it a whack. Give her a couple light beat downs. So these back halves are also a thinner material than this front plate. This is where you're going to struggle on a lot of these chassis, is how thick this front plate is. I want to say this is 60 thousandths thick. So, you know, soldering's just like welding. If you don't have a hot enough iron, you can't get the heat into this material, you're never going to get penetration, and it's going to, you know, it might be there, but it could be weak. It's kind of a challenge to solder these front plates when they're real thick, and this one's pretty thick. So the back half though, these things are a breeze. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to take some acid on your little brush here and put it where you're going to solder it at. And I'm going to solder this right at the bottom of this motor plate right here. Boom. Onto the back half lower piece. We're going to get some solder in this iron. Very little solder goes a long way, okay? If you put a big old wad of solder on here, you're going to make a mess. You just bring your solder over to your back half and put it down where you put that acid and wait for the acid to start sizzling for a second, and then start sliding your iron down. And you will get something like that. Now it's probably hard to see, but we'll change the camera here in just a minute. Okay, so I didn't get enough solder to my liking on that unit, so I'm going to get a little bit more solder and give it another pass. And I know I'm holding this with my fingers, but just be careful because this is hot, okay? My fingers are on fire right now, but my hands are kind of beat to death, so they can take more than I guess one's hand could. Okay, so the motor plate's in. Now we're going to go in between the back half here. A little more acid on there. A little bit of solder. That side's done. Acid again. Everywhere that you put this acid on this chassis, that solder is going to go there. It is going to automatically fall right off of your iron and go wherever that acid is. So it's you got to kind of be careful with that stuff because, man, that solder, it's going. That solder is going everywhere you put that acid. I know this is really hard to see. I'm going to have to flip it around when we're all done. But now we're going to do the uprights to the motor plate. Same thing, acid, solder, sizzle. Remember, I already put the acid on this side. Solder, sizzle. A little more solder on that one. Okay, so this is what you're going to get. Okay, so next we're going to talk about chassis jigs. I'm sure you probably could do this on, like a flat piece of granite or something that you have that's really true. I mean, you could probably make your own jig of some type, but I like to use an actual chassis jig for slot cars, which you can get. I am using a Carlisle chassis jig. This is what it looks like. Okay, this nut here is adjustable for wheelbase length, and then this is going to lock your back half into the jig, and you're going to tighten up this front plate down, and I'll show you how I do it. Okay, so you're going to take your back half that you just built. You got an axle, and we got, these are just some standard oil lights. And this just slides in there, you know, and you can tell how straight your uprights are when you're sliding this axle in and out. If it slides in and out real easy, then you know you're pretty good, and this thing slides out pretty easy. This thing's also all rusty. This is not going to be our axle that we used to race with on the final assembly. This is just a jig axle. So it's going to lock in your two studs here. It might be helpful if you try to tape it down or something to keep it where it don't move, because this thing it'll slide all over the place in there. Front plate. These, you know, it doesn't really matter what way you have this thing flipped around. I mean, but obviously, you know, that's backwards. So whenever you flip the car upside down, you want to see the correct marking. So put it on one way. You know, and these chassis, there's a million different ways to build, you know, or manufacturers of them. You know, for instance, this is a complete chassis that I built yesterday. It's a Texan chassis, very good quality piece, probably the best chassis on the market right now. A lot of guys are using these things, and you know, when you flip the car upside down to look at the bottom of it, it's got the state of Texas in it. So if you put that plate on upside down, you're going to be looking at, well, what the heck is that? You know what I mean? So it's just, you know, something that stupid makes your chassis look better, you know. And I don't even know what I'm doing, so, you know, I'm just showing you the things that I do and how we do it. Are they perfect? No. I mean, I'm sure somebody can hop on here and comment, oh, well, you didn't do that right, or I do it like this, you know, which is understandable. I mean, these things, there's really a bunch of different ways you can make these things. Okay, so we're in the jig. I don't have this tight yet because we're going to need to set the wheelbase. Okay, this is the body we're working with. All right, this is Pro Mod Mustang, 3D printed from Ents Hobbies on eBay. This guy has some really nice bodies. If you like 3D printed stuff, see how that just fell out? That's why I say, you know, you might want to tape it. I'm used to it falling all around everywhere, so it don't bother me none. But how I set the wheelbase is I move that front plate to the valance of the car. I mean, this valance has a lot of angle outward, so it might be too far forward. Make sure you don't put it too far forward. Make sure you have a little bit of room there so you can mount the body. I think that there is probably where I want to be. So we're gonna lock down our stud screw. There's lines on this jig here, you know, and that will help you. It's probably kind of hard to see, but that'll help you make sure you're straight. You know, you can slip this thing, and in these slots here at the front of this slot, you can see that line, so it can help you get this front plate really straight, so you know you're square. And I know there's plenty of real drag cars out there that ain't square. They're built on dirt shop floors like my race cars, so, and they still work like a mother. So that's how you should look in your jig with your proper wheelbase car. You know, you can kind of see how that's going to go right down on there. Just right. And now we got to get some tubes. Okay, so tubing. I use 3 different sizes of tubing when I build one of these slip joint cars. And I use Mid-America Products tubing. This is some 50 thousandths. I also use 82 thousandths. And I get some 60 thousandths off of Amazon, okay? The Mid-America tubing that we use is a hollow tubing, like a real round tube. And the stuff that I get off Amazon, that 60 is solid. So the reason for that is you want the tube to slip inside of another tube. For instance, you're going to take the 82 thousandths rod and you're going to slip the solid 60 inside of it so it can slip. That's why it's called a slip joint. Okay, slip joint, no bar, no wheelie bars. Okay, there's guys that are gung-ho about these no bar slot car drag cars, you know what I mean? That's all they run, that's all they have. They don't have bar cars, you know. So on to the next step. Okay, so the next thing you're going to do is you're going to want to take your 82 thousandths tubing, okay, and you're going to want to cut it. And I use a Dremel. It would be wise to invest in a, you know, good Dremel with a cut-off wheel or some way of cutting this small tubing, okay?
Oh yeah, Raiden, I put the car down.
So you're going to want to take and cut this 82 thousandths tubing the length of this back half here, and a piece to slide in the slot on this front plate. And then you're going to want to invest in a hand drill or a pin vise. I mean, you don't have to. I'm sure you can just go grab a drill bit out of your garage or whatever. But I like to clean all the burrs and stuff out of the ends of the tubing after I cut them. And then you're going to lay these just like that up against the outside of the back half and in these 2 slots of the front plate. And then you're going to solder them in there. So let's send it. Okay, so now I like to take like an old piece of tubing or something and just hold up against that tube, because it's going to want to fly away on you when you go to solder it. And remember, a little solder goes a long way. You can always add more solder. You can't take it off. I mean, you can take it off, but it's a pain in the butt, so. I like to use very small amounts of solder. And that's just what I do. I mean, again, you know, I'm not perfect. I'm sure there's people out there that'll tell you everything I'm doing wrong. So, I'll show you what we got. This is what you're going to end up with here on this back half. 82 thousandths tubes on the outside. And then you got your 2, which obviously I haven't soldered yet, on the front plate here. I like to cut them about halfway. You know, some people can cut them, you know, you can cut it all the way to the edge here, you know. And I'm sure there'll be somebody that's like, oh, you're supposed to cut it all the way to the edge. Well, I like to cut them halfway, and I'm going to show you why in a minute. Okay, so now we're going to solder these front 2 in place on this thick plate. And this is where it's going to suck, because This plate's thick, and like I said before, soldering is welding. So if you ain't getting hot enough, or you're moving too fast, you're not going to get any penetration in there. I did not use enough solder. And you might have to go over these a couple of times. You know, I use very little amounts of solder, like I said, so you know, I might go over this 2 or 3 times until it's fully soldered. But when you use small amounts of solder, it makes the job a lot cleaner. You can, you know, that's the number one thing I see with a lot of these chassis that are built, is there's just gobs of solder all over them, and they're not nice and clean. And there's nothing wrong with having gobs of solder on it. I mean, that just means it's definitely strong. But if you want to try to make your stuff cleaner, you know, just use less amounts of solder. You can always add more. I do have a solder sucker that sucks solder out. And you can also use an old slot car braid to get solder out. You heat it up, and that solder, it'll stick to all that braid. You can kind of get all your goops of solder off if you made a mess. And the kind of solder that you use really matters, because if you use this electrical solder like this here for metal work, it's really kind of hard to work with. You need more heat to get that stuff to melt, and it's just really hard to work with. But if you're using 6040 rosin cord electrical solder, this stuff will flow right in there like butter. Anywhere you put that acid, this stuff will flow right in there. I know this might be boring to watch, but you know, it takes a few passes to get that heat in the material, because it's a thick front plate. Alright, so I'll show you what we got here. And this is your front plate after you got them soldered. That's what it'll look like. Okay, so the next part on our chassis adventure here is you're going to want to cut a piece of the 82,000ths tube and solder it right here. And then you're going to take some of the solid 60,000ths tube and you're going to slip it inside of it after you solder it right here, so it's like a hinge. It can swing. And to bend this tubing, all I do is take a little pair of needle nose and I'll stick, you know, maybe an 1/8 inch or so out of it, and then I just bend it in my needle nose. Of course, that's not a good angle, but you know, you can bend it more. But that's how I bend these tubes. Okay, so after you solder your piece here and you bend your solid 60 thousandths tubes, you're going to want to take it and slip them inside that tube that you just soldered so it swivels. And then we will solder these right here to the inside of this back half. Okay, so now we're going to solder these. This is the first time I've ever used this solder to build a chassis with, and it actually works really good. And again, a little solder goes a long way. I can't stress that enough. If you guys are struggling to get your solder clean, the only advice I can give you is to just use a very small amount. Because it's really hard to make them really clean. And that's it. We're soldered on our hinge area here. The next thing you're going to want to do is, this is the Mid-America hollow 50 thousandths tubing. And you're going to want to cut these just a little short. And you don't want it all the way to the end here. You want to go about halfway up this tube that you put in the front plate. And you're going to slip these inside the back half tube straight through the front half tube. Okay, just like that. And just like this. And you're going to want to back it up, okay, until the tube is flush with this 82 rod that you put on the back half right on the outside here. And then you're going to want to solder the end of this back half so these tubes cannot fall out. And there's other ways you can do it. I've seen people put retainers on here so they can't fall out. They make real small retainers. But I just, I'm already soldering, so I always just solder up these two ends so the tubes can't fall out. And in the end, you have something like this. You can see these outer tubes slip inside of those back half tubes there. You slip inside the front half tube. And you don't, like I said, you don't want the tube that slips inside here. You don't want it all the way to the end. You want it about halfway down, or 3/4 of the way, so that this little tube is going to slide in and out of this bigger tube when the chassis is under load and it starts working. So if they're too long, you're going to hit this front plate here and it's not going to allow the chassis to work correctly. Okay, and in the end, what you're going to end up with essentially is something like this, where it has movement. It's not just a solid fixed chassis. You know, you want that flex. The car's gonna leave the starting line and the body is going to be mounted in the front. As you can see, I put a tube here, and then there's a tube on top of your hinge here, and then I slide that inside, and your body is going to mount in the front wheel well and behind the front wheel well. The chassis is going to mount in that area, and that's going to allow this back half to work. This car is going to want to squat when it leaves, and then as it goes down the track, it's going to want to start separating like a radial car. So you can make these tighter. You can make it with the solid tubing going on the outside rails as well, but you won't have as much flex in the chassis. I like to have a lot of flex in my cars. So front axle, as you can see here, your front axle mounts in these slots. The Scrivener chassis, it doesn't have the little holes in it like that one. It's just got a slot, and wherever I threw it at here, this is your front axle mount. You're just going to put that in that slot. You see how it's got a little there? It's just going to go right in them slots right there. Boom. And of course, you put your body on to figure out where your front axle needs to be in the car so it looks straight. And that's pretty much it, guys. That's how we build no bar slot car chassis, and they seem to work very well. And if you need any information on any of the products, how to get a chassis, how to get the tubing, where to get acid, I sell all this stuff. So you get in contact with me and we can get you set up and get you going. We appreciate you watching, guys. Tune in next time.